Hello guys, and welcome to this 7th tutorial about the SQL full course for beginners. If you haven't already watched the first part, you can find the link in the description. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about MySQL subqueries. So basically, a subquery is a query inside a query, which is also called nested query. The query contained in the subquery is called the outer query and can be select, insert, update, and delete. The subquery is called the inner query, and it can be used within select, from, and where. The subquery, which is also called the inner query, is executed before the outer query. And of course, the subquery needs to be used within parentheses. So here we have the syntax of the subquery. We have the outer query where we select the columns from a table. So here this example is subquery used within the where clause. So in the where clause we define our condition, then we open parentheses and we define our subquery. So we can select columns from table, we can retrieve single value, we can retrieve list of values, etc. There are 6 types of subqueries. We have the subquery as scalar operand, subquery in from clause with group by, comparisons using subqueries, so where we use the comparison operators, subqueries with any, in, some, or all, correlated subqueries, and finally we have subqueries with exists or not exists. So the first type is scalar or column subquery. It returns a single value like the maximum, the minimum, the average, so it will be in one column, one row. Or it can return a column of values, so it can be used anywhere in a query where column can be used. And here we have an example using insert into. So for example, we create a table which we call city population summary, and we insert some values like the minimum, the maximum, and the average. As you can see here, all the subqueries are defined within parentheses. The second type is the subquery in from clause with group by. First, the inner query, which is the subquery, returns a temporary table with categories or groups created with group by. Then after that, we retrieve data with the outer query from the temporary table. An alias must be used to name the temporary table and the temporary column or columns. Depends on the task. Here we have an example. We calculate the average of languages used in the world by country. So in this example, we have 2 tables. We have the country table and we have the languages table. The first thing that we have to do using the subquery is to count the total languages in each country, and we give it a name as total languages. Then we calculate the average using this temporary table, and we will see that later on in the hands-on. The third type is comparisons using subqueries. So they are used within the where clause, and we use comparisons operators to retrieve data depending on the comparison with a single value returned by the scalar subquery. For example, we can return the minimum, the maximum, or the average. Here we have an example. We select the name and the population from a table which is called cities, where the population is less than the average. So we have a table which is city, and we want to select all the cities that have population is less than the average. So select average population from city, which is the subquery, will return a single value, and we compare the population of each city with this single value. The next type is subqueries with in and not in. So it is also used within the where clause, and the in operator will allow to retrieve one if any of the values in the list matches. In this example, we have the customers who did not pay. We select all the customer ID from the payment table, so all the customers that have paid, and we check. So if the customer ID not in this list, it means that they did not pay. If all the customers have paid, this will return an empty list, and we will see that in the hands-on. Next, we have subqueries with any or some. So returns one if any of the values in the list satisfies the condition. It is also used within the where clause and must follow a comparison operator. As we have seen for in, we don't need to use any comparison operators, but with any or some, we have to use the comparison operators. And one small remark is that some is an alias for any. So if you use any or some, it is the same thing. So here with the subquery, we select customers that have addresses with 4 digits postal code. Then we select all the names of the customers with this ID. The subquery will select for us all the postal codes with 4 digits. Then we use this list to select all the customers that have these addresses. Next, we have subqueries with all. So all returns 1 if all the values in the list satisfies the condition. It means that no single row has to be false. So everything needs to be true. Otherwise, it will return false. Okay, it is also used within the where clause and must follow a comparison operator. Same thing, here we have the same example like the any, but we use all. So return true if all zip codes have 4 digits. As we will see, there are postal codes which have 5 digits. Thus, not all the values in the address ID list are with 4 digits. As a result, when we use all, it will return for us an empty list. Next, we have correlated subqueries. A correlated subquery depends on the outer query, which means that it contains a reference to the table that appears in the outer query. As we see here in the subquery, which is between parentheses, we add the column which is called address ID as a reference to the outer table. So here we use the condition where postal code is less than 10, and we add our reference, which means that this subquery depends on the outer query. And this is why it is called correlated subquery. Finally, we have subqueries with exist or not exist. So it is also used within the where clause. Exists return true or false. It returns true if the subquery returns at least one row. If the resultant set is empty, it returns false. And here, one small remark is that the selecting columns in the select statement of the subquery do not matter. For example, here, as you can see, so we have select all from customer C, where we don't write any columns, so where exists, we use directly exists after the where. We open our parentheses, so when we select the address ID or we select all or we select 2 or 3 columns, it is the same thing because exists will look at the retrieved data. If we have at least one row which is true, the exists returns true. Otherwise, it will return for us false. And not exist is the opposite of exists, and generally it is used with correlated subqueries. So when we use exists or not exists, we generally add the reference to the outer subquery. So to understand that better, we are going to apply that using MySQL workbench. Okay, so to start, we are going to use the world database. So we write use world, okay. And as you can see here, we have 3 tables. So we have the city, the country, and the country language. For example, if we select all from city order by population, so we have the different names of the cities, the country code, the district, and the population. What we wanted to do is to first work with the scalar or the column subquery. So first we are going to create a table that we will call city population summary, and we will add 3 columns. So the first column, it is the minimum population, the maximum population, and the average population. The 3 columns will have data type which is a float. Okay, so we create this table. Then we want to insert into our city population summary the different values using subqueries. So the first one is the minimum population from the city. So if we copy paste that, okay, so we'll have one single value. All right, is here. The minimum is 42. Now, as we have said, we can use the scalar subquery anywhere where column can be used. So as you can see here, this subquery returns a single value which is 42, and the same thing for the others. So if we write insert into city population summary, and here we will put all the values in the same order, so I didn't put the name of the columns. And if we execute that, so if we select all from city population summary, we will get the following table. So we'll get the minimum population. Okay, minimum population is this name, and it contains 42. The maximum is this one, and the average, we have the average population. Okay, so this is subquery as scalar operand. Now we have also said that it can return a column of values. Okay, so here we can select, so we have, if we put this alone, so we put select the average. So here we have the average, and if we want to add this value into all the rows, so we have a column of values, we write select all, we add this column, okay, as we call it average population from city. So if we execute that, we'll have the following. We have this column of the values which contain the average. So in each row, it will add this value. So now it has no meaning, but there are some cases where you will be asked to add a column of values, for example, as a reference. Okay, so this is about the first type. Now, when we use subqueries for comparison, So here we have calculated the average. Okay, it will give us a single value. We are going to select the name and the population of the from the city table where the population is less than the average. So this is select average population is the so this is the subquery, and it has this following value. Now if we execute that, we'll get all the cities that have a population which is less than the average. For example, if we put equal, so we'll have nothing. If we'll put greater than, we'll get all the cities that have a population which is greater than the average. Okay, so this will return for us single value, which is the average. Then we will use comparison operator to compare the population. Okay, now we have the third type, which is subquery inform clause with group by. We are going to calculate the average of languages used in the word by country. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to select everything, select all from country, so that you will have an idea what do we have. Okay, so here we have everything in each country, and in the country table we'll have the code. All right, now same thing for select all from. So we have everything here, and as you can see here in the country language we have country code, and in country it is called code, right? So our subquery is defined as the following. So if we select the subquery, copy, and if we paste that, okay, it will give us the following temporary table. All right, so what we have done is we select the name in each country, we count the languages, okay, and we call it as total languages. All right, from country language, inner join. So since we don't have the name of each country in the country language table, so we inner join the country language with country on. As we have said, in country it is called code, and in country language it is called country code. We use group by country language country code, so I'm going to group that using the country code, and we order by the total. Okay, so our temporary table, which is the following table that we will get using the subquery, we call it temporary table. So we use an alias as temporary table, which is the following table. Here we are going to calculate the average of total languages. So it will calculate the average of this column as average languages by country. So it will calculate the average languages in all countries all over the world, and it will give us the following result. So we have on average 4 languages per country. Okay, so now next we have subqueries with any, in, some, or all. So first, as we have said, any and some are the same, so we can use any one that you like. And here we start with an example with in. Okay, so basically when using in keyword, we first define a list. For example, in this case, we want to select cities that have a country code that is not included in country table. Okay, so here in country we have different codes. Okay, so we have different codes that are defined in the country table, and what we want to know is if there are cities that have a country code that is not included in country. Okay, to do that we add not, so we have not in, and we execute that. So we'll get an empty list because all the cities that are defined in here have a country code that is included in country table. Okay, so as we have said, basically in and not in will check for a given value in the list. Okay, since here all the country codes that are defined for cities are included in country, so we'll get an empty list. Okay, Next, for any or some, we'll use the Scalar database. So write use Scalar. And same thing in here, any will check if this list is empty, it will return false. If this list returns or has at least one row, it will give us the corresponding customers. Okay, so the select address ID is the subquery and it has the following values. So if we want to display the different values, okay, so we'll have all the address IDs where the postal code has 4 digits. All right, so the list is not empty, thus any will return true, and it will give us all the customers that have an address ID where the postal code is or has 4 digits. Okay, so here we have all the customers which have an address that has a postal code with 4 digits. Okay, same thing if we want to retrieve data that have 5 digits postal code, we can use greater than, and we have this list. Okay, as a result, when we use the all keyword for this statement, we'll get an empty list. Why? Because here we have postal codes that have 4 digits and others they have 5 digits. Okay, which means that the condition for all is not satisfied. This is why we get an empty resulting set. Same thing here, we have another example using in and not in, and here we want to select all the customers that did not pay. Okay, so we select customer ID from payment. Here we select all the customers who have paid. Okay, we have the list. Now we want to know the customers that did not pay. To do that, we check the customers with the customer ID that is not in the list. Okay, so if any customer has customer ID that is not in this list, it means that the customer did not pay. Okay, so here we have nothing. Okay, which means that all the customers have paid. Finally, we have correlated subqueries with exists and not exists. Here the same thing, we want to select all the customers from the customer table where the postal code has 4 digits or 3 or 2 or 1. So all the values of the postal code which are less than 10,000. Okay. Here the same thing, exists will return true if at least there exists one row in this list. Okay. So if we execute that, we will have more than one row, which means that when we execute, okay, it will return for us all the rows of the customers that have an address where the postal code has 4 or less digits. Okay, now if we remove the reference, so the query will not be anymore a correlated subquery. We execute that, so as we can see, it has retrieved all the customers. Okay, because it will select all from customer C. So here we have a list that has at least one row, which means that exist will return true and it will select all from customers. But if we add the reference, it means that it will depend on the outer query. Thus, when we execute this query, it will take in consideration only the addresses where the postal code is less than 10,000. Okay, as you can see here, we don't have all the customers. For example, if we want to use only 10, we'll get the following. So we'll get only one customer. But if we remove the reference, it will give us all the table because exists returns true. Okay, same thing if we use not exists, it will give us the opposite of exists. Okay, since we have true with exists, if we add not, it will give us a false, thus it will retrieve for us an empty list. So that's it for the subqueries. I hope that you have learned new things. Thanks for watching and see you in the next tutorial.